Bobby finally gives his notice. We kind of teased it a little earlier that this was a little bit of a falling out. Bobby reaches out to Hulk, who he was friendly with and worked with in the AWA, and says, "Hey, I'm ready to go." And Hulk said, "Call me back in 5 minutes." Because at this
Drained of magic, your world will be ripe for destruction by my demon masters, and my power will be limitless. Eat magic, imposter.
You need something? Safe travels.
You are too late. With the focusing iris under my control, I can siphon the arcane energy from Azeroth's ley lines directly into my magnificent self. Drained of magic, your world will be ripe for destruction by my demon masters, and my power will be limitless. Eat magic, imposter! This is not right. The shadow will not control me. I must project this power back through the iris.
You cannot defy the will of the Legion, Archmage. All will perish!
Hold them off, champion, for the sake of Azeroth.
King's honor. Light bless you.
You are too late. With the focusing iris under my control, I can siphon the arcane energy from Azeroth's ley lines directly into my magnificent self. Drained of magic, your world will be ripe for destruction by my demon masters, and my power will be limitless. Eat magic, imposter! This is not right. The shadow will not control me.
You cannot defy the will of the Legion, Archmage. All will perish!
Hold them off, champion, for the sake of Azeroth.
Need help? Go with
Point, they had pursued Bobby a handful of times. Well, when Bobby gets the call back from Hulk, Hulk says he just talked to Vince, and when you get home, give him a call. So Bobby calls Vince on a Friday night and says he's ready to make a change. He makes him a substantial offer, and he accepts it. So Bobby picks up the phone and calls Greg, or actually calls Vern, but Greg answers, and he tells Greg that the WWF made him an offer, and Greg says something like, "Oh, those bastards are after it again." And he tells him that it was a substantial offer, and Greg says, "Well, go ahead." So then Vern calls Bobby back very quickly and says, "Hey, if we're going to do this, you need to come tell me face to face." So Bobby asks if he's going to be in the office tomorrow around 1, and Vern says yes. Bobby thinks this is a little suspicious, so according to Bobby, he prepares a blade to protect himself, and he keeps his hands in his pocket the whole time. When he gets into the office, Vern says to Greg, "Let's get him and throw him out the window. They're 20 floors up." And Bobby says something like, "Go ahead, you'll make my wife a very wealthy woman." And then he says that Vince offered me twice what you're paying me to do MSG TV and manage. And he said in his book that back then the WWF managers only worked TV, and then they'd get home and be paid for every show on the road, all the house shows that their guy was at. So he'd have less travel and be at home with his 5-year-old daughter. And then Vern, of course, makes Bobby an offer and said, "I don't know where I'll get it, but I'll get it to you." And Bobby told him something like, "I have to look out for myself now. have all this land and money. I want that. Now's my chance to advance myself. And according to the rumor and innuendo, Bobby says he'd finish out all of his committed dates, but he didn't want to work with Brad Riggins because there was some fear on Bobby's side that Brad, as a former Olympian, may accidentally on purpose break his leg or neck. Do you remember hearing about this meeting? Because this seems like a really different time in the wrestling business. It reads like it's straight out of a mob movie.
No, it was. It definitely. I heard that exact thing from Bobby himself. And the other part about it was he called Vince and he says, well, I called Vern and I'm going to meet with him. And then he called him afterwards. Vince laughed. God damn, pal. I wish I could have been there and seen that. Just, he thought it was funny. But he also knew that, Vern was all bark and no bite and there wasn't anything that he was going to do about it. You got to, and you got to remember, out of context, when you go through all these things, when you forget about the fact that Vince had already gone to all of these old timers, offered to buy him out, offered to bring him in and be a part of it. They all threatened him and told him that they would bury him. So there was no love lost. He had made the offer, hey, I'm coming in, I'm going to do this, I'd like for you to be a part of it. They all said no, with the exception of Mike LaBelle out in L.A. And so he's like, okay, hey, it's on, let's do it. So, Vern doing that, yeah, that was kind of Vern's M.O., especially back in those days. But Bobby was fearful. Bobby didn't want to stay another day. He wanted to get out because he didn't trust Vern. He didn't trust anybody there. He just wanted to go and get the hell out of there. So I don't think that he made any more dates after that.
It's an interesting deal in the wrestling business at this time because after word gets out, what's the old game that wrestlers used to play? Telephone,
telegraph, tele-wrestler.
Well, Harley Race gives Bobby a call and says, I hear you're going to New York. We've been friends for 30 years. You can't do this to us. There was a feeling in the business that if you left this territory system and you went to work for Vince, you were kind of joining the evil empire, right, Bruce?
Amongst a lot of people, yes, without a doubt. And especially if you were entrenched in, let's say, the Crockett territory or Atlanta, Georgia, down in Texas, Bill Watts, Kansas City, St. Louis, obviously Vern, Chicago, and those areas, that going to work for Vince, you were going to work for the enemy, and you were dead to him. So it was, Vince was making a play because he had tried before, so he said, okay, I'll take what stars I want and I'll make them international stars and grab your best hold. So the feeling amongst those, Harley had his territory, had Kansas City, Vern obviously had all this stuff. Those guys, it was a slap in the face, and it was an act of war. So if you went there, man, you were playing for the wrong team.
Bobby talks about the first time he meets Vince after he works with the company. They met briefly in Chicago when Vince was promoting the Ali and Inoki fight. But when they're at the MSG show, Vince barks at Bobby to put out a cigar because Bobby had a lit cigar and Vince apparently didn't like smoking. Bobby keeps this in mind, and at a WrestleMania, I guess 5, McMahon is yelling at Jesse Ventura for having a cigar. So later that night, when Bobby sees the cigar in an ashtray, he took it and put it in the breast pocket of Vince's suit coat that was hanging on a rag. Do you remember any other interesting smoking stories? We've heard a phenomenal one on the $1 Million Man episode about a guy smoking in first class on a plane. Any other smoking stories with Vince McMahon you can share?
Well, with Bobby Heenan in particular, Bobby used to like to go into Vince's office. This is funny and kind of sick in a way, but before Vince would get there, so Vince would always be late. He'll be late to his funeral. But Bobby used to like to get into Vince's office, relieve himself, not flush, and then smoke a couple of cigarettes in the office to fill the office up with cigarette smoke, so that when Vince came in, his office would smell of cigarette smoke and usually have something floating in the toilet.
That's so awesome. How can you not love Bobby Heenan? Even the boss isn't above being ribbed.
Oh, nobody was above getting something from the Weasel. He was absolutely priceless. But he would also be the first one when Vince would come out barking to point at somebody else. I saw that. You know what, Vince? I was in your office. I saw a janitor. He was smoking. I said, "Hey, you son of a bitch, you better put that damn thing out." And he said, "Oh, yeah? Well, screw you." And he put it right out on your desk. I'll point him out if you want me to. He just constantly would do those things. If Vince was in a meeting with somebody, Bobby would sometimes sit outside the office and some guy would walk backstage, a janitor or something. He says, "Yeah, you need to clean up that room in there right away. And the guy would walk in on a meeting, an intense meeting with Vince and whoever, and get thrown out. The guy says, "Man, they don't need to clean up." "No, he wants it done right away. You got to get back in there." Next one to come by, he would send them in until finally Vince would come out and bark at Bobby. And of course, he'd point at Lanza or somebody else, blame them. But always, and I was, I was there when Bobby did the cigar in his coat pocket.
Bobby told a story once about Vince McMahon as a teenager, probably 14 or 15. He's hanging out with a wrestler named Dr. Jerry Graham, and they would drive Graham's Cadillac down the Broadway with the top down, and Vince was wearing a red ruffled shirt and had bleached blonde hair. This is Vince McMahon that we all know. And according to the rumor and innuendo, when Vince Sr. finds out, he goes nuts and puts a major stop to that. Do you remember hearing any stories about Vince McMahon as a teenager being infatuated with wrestling and trying to emulate some of the guys?
Dr. Jerry Graham was Vince McMahon's hero. That's somebody that he always wanted to be, because Jerry Graham was larger than life. Jerry Graham lit cigars with $100 bills and had bleach blonde hair and always had, the nicest clothes, always had, convertible Cadillacs. So when Vince comes up from North Carolina to Washington, D.C., to be with his dad for the summer, Vince bleaches his hair blonde and goes and hangs out with Dr. Jerry Graham because that's what he wanted to be. Yeah, and his father was pretty upset and put the kibosh on that pretty quick.
Interestingly enough, Dr. Jerry Graham was put into the WWE Hall of Fame this year as part of the Legacy Wing. Why do you think it took so long for Jerry Graham to get put in?
I don't know. And to me, I always thought that Dr. Jerry Graham would be one of those people that would be a part of one of the major inductions, because he really meant so much to Vince himself, but also so many of the talent, they have no idea. Superstar Billy Graham, they think they're emulating Superstar Billy Graham. Billy Graham emulated Dr. Jerry Graham. And that flamboyance and that cockiness and that heel persona was really in so many ways first done by obviously Gorgeous George and Dr. Jerry Graham back in the day. Graham did it in a big way in New York and California. Huge star.
So when Bobby's first brought in to the company, he is brought in to manage Jesse Ventura. By the time he gets there, the word is out that Jesse's starting to experience some physical problems. He's got some circulation problems in his legs, and he doesn't want or isn't going to be able to work full time. So they're going to try to find some other things for Jesse to do. So instead, Vince asked Bobby to manage Big John Studd. Bobby agrees. Their first show is in Minnesota, AWA country. Now remember how he left. Bobby's a little nervous. So when he comes to the show, he's actually wearing a mask when he walks into the back. And he put a rock in his shoe to change his walk-up so no one would be able to identify that that's who he was. Bobby felt like he had never left the AWA, though, when he appears in front of the crowd, because they remember him from the Weasel suit matches and start chanting Weasel right away. You remember hearing that Bobby was maybe a little suspect about walking in as himself this night as a WWF performer, but in AWA country?
Bobby could be a little paranoid at times, thinking that, everybody was out to get him, but that was the era that he was brought up in. He was brought up in as a nasty heel that people wanted to kill. So now you're going home to your territory, and there were crazy things going on. You know, ring trucks would have flat tires, and things would go missing, and people would show up at hotels, and knock on doors, and threats were made. So he was being overly cautious and overly careful. It was probably, you can attribute a lot of it to paranoia and growing up that way in the business.
Bobby's actually wrestling quite a bit in 84 and 85 here. In November, he worked a $10,000 steel cage battle royal that was won by The Rock's father, Rocky Johnson. He's also taking on enhancement talent, and he's doing this on Primetime Wrestling from MSG. He's getting wins over Anthony Jones. He's even in a tag match with Jimmy Snuka and the Tonga Kid against Bobby the Brain and Big John Studd. And then when they make their way over to Dallas to close out 84, Andre the Giant and Blackjack on one side, Bobby the Brain Heenan and Ken Patera on the other side. I think a lot of people kind of overlooked that. He had an opportunity to work with the Sammartinos. They worked a shot in February of 85, Bruno and David against Bobby and Paul Orndorff. And then, think about this. Let me run through this for you. I think you'll like this, Bruce. February 23rd in Altoona, Pennsylvania, David Sammartino, Junkyard Dog, and George Wells. How's that for a thing? Taking on Bobby the Brain Heenan, Johnny V, and Ken Patera. That is quite the six-man tag, is it not?
Ooh. Yeah, that's crazy. And all those matches were traction matches with Bobby, you know, being the manager, being forced to wrestle in some of these things. And I would say normally Bobby is probably the best worker out of the group in some of those instances. But working with Andre and doing some of those things, he hated working with Bruno. I'm not sure that Bruno and Bobby really got along all that well. But
did Bruno take
down his nose?
Did Bruno take himself too seriously?
I think Bruno took himself too seriously in those days. Yeah, I really did. Bruno's a really nice guy. Really, really nice guy. But when you start talking about the business and how the business has changed, and I'm going back to when I was around Bruno in the late 80s, he didn't like the changes. He didn't like what the business had become in 89. 88.
Well, but I mean that's true of a lot of people today. I mean, Jim Cornette hates the business. He hates a lot of changes about the business today.
Exactly, and I think anybody in anything, I think that the football players, you know, they watch football nowadays and look at a bunch of pansies wearing pads.
Sure.
You know, it just changes. The business evolves, and you either evolve with it or you die, and you get gobbled up. So at that time, I know Bruno took himself very seriously, and Bobby was a gimmick manager, and having, you know, going out working matches, and they just didn't gel.
Bobby's working against the Sammartinos, and he's tagging a lot with Paul Orndorff. You know how Bobby and Paul got along?
Great. They got along great. Paul's from Georgia, and man, it was. Paul could be kind of miserable sometimes, be a little bit ornery, but so could Bobby. And they gelled well together, and they got along. The only guy going back that I remember that Bobby didn't get along with really was Rick Rude.
Well, I want to talk about that in a minute. We'll circle back to Rick Rude. He's doing a lot of tag matches here with Big John Studd against Andre the Giant. You've told us many episodes ago that Andre and Big John Studd just did not get along. Andre did not like Big John. How did Bobby get along with Big John Studd? And early here in 85, what was Bobby's relationship like with Andre, to the best of your understanding?
Oh, Andre and Bobby were always good. They go way back from the days in Indianapolis. So Andre and Bobby were always good friends. They always got along. Andre just didn't like giants. Andre didn't like anybody that could enter into that giant realm. Andre, I'm only giant. God, I wish I could do Andre as good as Dan Soder does.
Nobody can.
But, no, it's incredible. But, you know, Stud was Stud. And at that time, Bobby was so happy to have a job and was so happy he was making money. Bobby didn't care who he managed. And he was just willing to do, let me do my job. I'll go out and get these guys over.
March 31st, 1985, of course, is WrestleMania 1. Well, at the time, it's just WrestleMania. Bobby's managing Big John Studd here against Andre the Giant, the Body Slam match. Of course, there's a $15,000 bag of cash on the line. And it's one of the more iconic Bobby Heenan moments when Andre's throwing the cash out to the fans. Bobby runs in, steals the bag, and hightails it out of there. It's the biggest show in the history of the business at that point. Did you ever talk about what WrestleMania meant to Bobby?
At the time, I think that everybody saw it as a milestone, and they were looking at it as the feeling in New York was this was something special, and it was much bigger than a big wrestling show because of all the entertainers and the celebrities and the media attention that it was getting. I'll tell you a funny story about that match. Was they had the big WWF duffel bag full of cash, and the finish of the match was as it was, but Andre grabs the duffel bag, and Andre was supposed to reach in and grab one handful of cash, because they had up on top, they had like the hundreds and the 50s and the 20s and everything. So Andre was going to grab one handful of cash and throw it out into the crowd, and then Bobby was supposed to be there.
Right.
Well, Andre gets it, and he reaches in and starts throwing handfuls of cash. And Bobby can't get to him right away, because Andre's walking away, going away from Bobby and just, kind of sticking at the vents. Here's more money for you. Here's a big dollar. And throwing it out into the crowd just to have a little fun.
In 1985, Bobby managed Big John Studd, King Kong Bundy, Adrian Adonis, The Missing Link, and Ken Patera. Any stories you can drop on us about any of those guys?
Oh, God. Ernie Ladd used to say about King Kong Bundy, Bundy, every time you cash a check, you're stealing money, Bundy. You're the drizzling shits, Bundy. Get out of the business. If you weren't big, fat, and white, you wouldn't be here. But, gosh, going back, Ken Patera was one that Bobby enjoyed managing, hated working with, because Ken was just so damn strong. And, Kenny was Kenny, and the world's strongest man at the time really didn't know his own strength, and Bobby just hated being slung around by the neck and what have you. But for the most part, Bobby went out and his job was to get people over, and he just loved being able to take guys and make them more than they could have been on their own.
WrestleMania 2, of course, goes down in 1986, April 2nd. 3 locations here is the idea: Uniondale, New York, Chicago, and LA. Bobby's on the LA show, and here he's managing King Kong Bundy in the main event. Of course, Bundy is challenging Hulk Hogan in a salad and steel cage for the world title. Of course, Hogan won and retained the title. But the more interesting thing is, he was actually in the hospital the morning of WrestleMania 2 in Tampa, Florida. He had a procedure done where they shot dye in his spine, and this is because of the broken neck that he suffered in 1983 in Japan. But he had this pain all of a sudden that went from his wrist to his neck. So never any pain in his hand, then his wrist to his neck. And it had bothered him for the 3 years prior. So 83 to 84 to 85 and now into 86. But he never had any insurance and couldn't take time off because he couldn't afford the surgery and to miss the dates. He had a family to support. But here, he finally makes time to do it. And he says that someone from the WWF told him if he didn't make WrestleMania that night, he was going to be fired. So Bobby checked himself out that morning after having this procedure done. And the nurse asked him where he was going, and he said, "I'm going to Los Angeles to wrestle. See you later," and caught the plane to LA. After the show, he catches a red eye back to Tampa and comes back to the hospital, checks in at 5 in the morning, and goes to bed. Bobby said that he felt like the way he was handled was a little disgraceful, in that it was, come to WrestleMania or you're fired. Did you ever talk to Bobby about the situation at WrestleMania 2?
No, not that he would be fired. I do remember when he went into the hospital and he's told that story. It just scared the hell out of him because he had numbness.
Right.
And he had what he described as like lightning shooting down his arm, which he had never had before. He had had pain and he had had problems moving his neck, but he was scared. He was scared. But, you know, I'd always heard from him that, you know, he wasn't missing WrestleMania. So I'd never heard that he was told he was going to be fired. At least I never heard that from him. Not saying it didn't happen. I don't know.
Bobby has told a story where he would refer to Bundy as Shamu because of the way he looked. And he says one day when they're in first class together, Bundy falls asleep and the airline stewardess comes over and says, "Would you like anything?" He orders a scotch and water and she says, "Would your friend like something?" And he said, "Yes, bring him a pail of fish." I don't know why, but that kind of... Once upon a time, Bobby got an opportunity to challenge the tag team titles. He and Bundy teamed up to take on the British Bulldog in Long Island for the World Tag Team titles. How funny of a pairing would that have been? Bobby Heenan and King Kong Bundy as tag champs.
Absolutely brutal. And that's another one. You know, Bobby did not enjoy working with Dynamite and Davey Boy, especially Dynamite. Just felt they were reckless and too stiff and didn't take care of him enough.
August 26th in Toronto, the WWF holds a big event. It draws over 64,000 people. And you would see in the main event, Bobby is managing Paul Orndorff as he challenges Hulk Hogan for the world title. Of course, Hogan won by DQ. We've had lots of questions about that. We don't go into great detail because it's before Bruce was there. But it was a big moment in Bobby's career and certainly a highlight for Orndorff, so we wanted to mention it. In 86, Bobby starts doing commentary, primetime and All-American Wrestling. Did you hear how that came about? Did he and Gorilla already know that they'd have this magical chemistry together? Or is it something they just kind of figured out on air working together?
No, I think that when Jesse started doing the commentary for Superstars and they were moving away from Jesse doing the primetime show, that they just slid Bobby Heenan in there. Bobby had the gift of gab, and let's try him out. That's just always what I was told. He was absolutely a natural at it, and the chemistry with him and Gorilla was, well, nothing more needs to be said there.
We did a whole show on Bobby and Gorilla. We call it Primetime Wrestling. I believe it's episode 11. It's available in the archives over at somethingtowrestle.com. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. There are tons of fabulous Bobby Heenan stories on there. Anything else you'd like to touch on about Primetime Wrestling? I know we did a whole show on that, but that was many moons ago, and you probably had plenty of time to reflect on memories of working with Bobby. Anything you can share with us that maybe we missed the first time of talking about Bobby Heenan and Gorilla on Primetime?
Well, the most important thing to me about that entire time, when I started in 1987, Primetime was one of the first shows that I was responsible for as a producer. And here's a 24-year-old kid coming into this big company. I really didn't have a job description lined out or anything like that. And I'm going down and I'm working with people that have worked together for many, many years at Video One and what have you, and Gorilla and Bobby, who had been there, and old timers in the business. Gorilla used to be one of the partners, and they could have made it really, really difficult for me. And they did exactly the opposite. And Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon both kind of took me under their wing and brought me in and endorsed me, which, by the way, they didn't do for everybody for many years afterwards. It used to be the running gag whenever we would have someone new come in and we would be taping Primetime Wrestling in the studio. Well, we would walk people through Edit 1, and they would go in and meet Bobby and Gorilla on the set. And, hey, and Bobby and Gorilla, big smiles, and hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you. And then we would walk them back through. Well, the microphones were on.
Sure.
So you would always hear Gorilla and Bobby talking like they're off camera. It's not on air. No one's supposed to hear this. But obviously we all knew that everybody could hear. And it was here where we would always find out whether someone was going to make it or not. Because you would have Bobby, they would time it perfectly, like who was what the hell was the name of that jackoff that just walked in here? What the hell was up with his hair? Did you see the shirt he was wearing? And Monsoon, without missing a beat, would be, I don't know, don't commit the name to memory.
Oh my God.
Here these people are. They're coming in either for a job interview or they're just hired. So they're meeting everybody, and now the host of the primetime wrestling is just completely dogged them, and they have no idea what the hell to think. But it was a great routine that we did, and if they liked the person, they would put them over a little bit. But if they didn't, man, oh God, they could be brutal.
Do you remember anybody who got that treatment that we fans may remember their name?
Ooh, boy. I tell you one guy was Murray Hodgkins, who took it personal and was like, what the hell?
Murray Hodgkins, if you don't recall, boys and girls, is the guy who was on Donahue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's his claim to fame. Let's talk about the Andre turn in 87. This is what a lot of people want to hear about. Bobby wrote in his book he didn't know they were going to turn Andre heel. But then one day at a show, Andre walks up to him in the back and says something like, we're going to have some fun, boss. And Bobby's a little confused because he's not managing Andre at the time. A few days after this, McMahon approaches